All started in the late 1960s in the industrial heart of England, Birmingham. The city's gray skies, massive factories, and endless noise formed the DNA of the band's music. Tony Iommi suffered an accident while working in a metal factory and lost the tips of 2 of his fingers. While everyone said, "It's over," he extended his fingers with plastic parts and tuned down the guitar to make it easier to play with the strings. That famous, dark, and heavy Sabbath tone was born from this tragic accident. A revolution was sprouting amidst impossibilities. Tony Iommi is not just a guitarist, he is an architect. Black Sabbath's music rose on his shoulders. The note progression he added to music, known as the tritone, or the devil's interval, created an inexplicable unease in listeners. For the first time, people truly began to fear music. When they entered the studio for the first album, they only had 12 hours. There were no production tricks, just the pure, raw, and terrifying energy of 4 young men. On that rainy day in 1970, the first album dropped like a bomb. The self-titled first album began with the song Black Sabbath. Thunder, rain sounds, and bells tolling from afar. This was the darkest opening rock music had ever seen. Critics trashed the album. Rolling Stone magazine called them a bad copy of Cream. But the fans didn't think so. The album entered the charts at number 8. This success was the greatest proof that a monster had awakened, one that even mainstream media could not stop. Without slowing down, Paranoid arrived within the same year. Actually, the album's name was going to be War Pigs, but the record company changed it at the last moment for fear of criticism regarding the Vietnam War. The song Paranoid was written in just 20 minutes to complete the album, but it became the band's biggest hit. Along with Iron Man and War Pigs, this album was accepted as the holy book of heavy metal. Sabbath was now a giant known not only in England, but throughout the whole world. By 1971, the sound grew even heavier with Master of Reality. Iommi dropped his guitars down to the level of C. This added an unheard-of intensity and bass depth to the music. While nodding to drug culture with Sweet Leaf, they reinforced their anti-war stance with Children of the Grave. This album is the ground zero for the doom metal and stoner rock genres we know today. Geezer Butler's distorted tones on bass guitar supported the guitars like a wall. The year is 1972 and Volume 4. The group had moved to Los Angeles and the drug budget exceeded the album budget. The song Snowblind was a love letter written directly to cocaine, but it was described implicitly to escape censorship. Musically, the group began experimenting. Pianos and more complex structures came into play. Even a ballad like Changes came from the hands of these tough men. However, the cracks within the group and drug addiction were becoming impossible to hide. The group was experiencing a blockage. Tony Iommi could no longer write riffs. They found the solution by renting a castle in Wales said to be haunted. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath was born in the studio established in the castle cellar. Enriched by Rick Wakeman's keyboards, this album revealed Sabbath's progressive side. The moment Iommi found that legendary main riff became the band's salvation. This album went down in history as one of Sabbath's peaks, both technically and artistically. When Sabotage was released in 1975, the band was in a legal battle with their managers. Even the album title was a reference to this situation. This was a period when lawyers were waiting in the studio. This anger was reflected in the music. Proto-thrash riffs like Symptom of the Universe came from this album. Ozzy Osbourne's vocal performance peaked on this album. However, the group was exhausting itself financially and spiritually. Sabotage was the last great masterpiece of Sabbath's pure quartet lineup. In 1976, the band changed direction with Technical Ecstasy, a cleaner sound, more keyboards, and mainstream rock tones. However, fans did not like this change much. Iommi had taken over the production of the band, and the tension between him and Ozzy had reached an unbearable level. Although songs like Dirty Women were still powerful, the old Sabbath magic seemed to have vanished. The group had entered a period of questioning its own identity. When they entered the studio for the 1978 album Never Say Die, everything was in shambles. Ozzy had left the group and then returned. The songwriting was completely chaotic. The album became a strange mix ranging from jazz to punk. When the tour ended, Tony Iommi had to fire Ozzy from the band. Everyone thought Black Sabbath was over. The founding fathers of heavy metal were now like a wreck. But no one expected the next legend. 1980, the year Black Sabbath was born from the ashes. Ronnie James Dio, who left Rainbow, joined the group. Dio's operatic, powerful voice and charisma, popularizing the metal sign, devil horns, brought a new breath to Sabbath. The album Heaven and Hell was a masterpiece. With songs like Neon Nights and Die Young, Sabbath stood tall in the middle of the NWO/BHM movement. This success after Ozzy is considered one of the greatest comebacks in music history. The second album with Dio, Mob Rules, 1981, combined the band's dark side with a modern sound. Vinny Appice had replaced Bill Ward on drums and brought a harder rhythm. Epic tracks like The Sign of the Southern Cross proved how creative the band still was. However, tension soon rose with Dio as well. As a result of the arguments that broke out during the mixing of the Live Evil concert album, Dio and Appice left the group. The strangest pairing in Sabbath history, the legendary voice of Deep Purple, Ian Gillan, joined Black Sabbath. The 1983 album Born Again was an incredibly heavy and savage album despite its terrible cover design and strange production. Songs like Disturbing the Priest and Zero the Hero are still cult favorites. However, Gillan's style could not achieve long-term harmony with Sabbath, and he also left the group. The group was once again drifted into uncertainty. In the late 80s and early 90s, Black Sabbath made great but underrated albums like The Eternal Idol, Headless Cross, and Tear under the leadership of Tony Martin. Tony Iommi was trying to keep the Sabbath name alive on his own. The music in this period was more in the epic metal style. Although sales did not come close to the Ozzy and Dio eras, the loyal audience loved this technical and melodic version of Sabbath. Headless Cross is still remembered as a metal classic today. In 1992, the world was shaken by shocking news. Dio had returned to Sabbath. The Dehumanizer album was one of the heaviest and most modern produced works in the band's history. Songs like TV Crimes and I showed how influential Sabbath could still be in the grunge and alternative metal world of the 90s. However, egos came into play again, and this partnership ended once more. But the real big reunion was very close. In 1997, an earthquake occurred worldwide. Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward came back together. They filled stadiums as part of the Ozfest tour. They crowned this magnificent return with a live album titled Reunion. With a new song, Psycho Man, they proved they still had that old chemistry. This reunion was the most anticipated event in the heavy metal world, and Sabbath was at the top again. In 2006, Iommi, Butler, Dio, and Appice gathered again under the name Heaven Hell. They didn't use the name Black Sabbath, but this was a real Sabbath lineup. They released the album The Devil You Know, 2009. This album was Dio's last studio work before his sad passing in 2010. The Black Sabbath legacy was immortalized once again with Dio's unique voice. Ronnie James Dio said goodbye as a metal legend. In 2013, after a 35-year hiatus, Ozzy, Iommi, and Butler, with Brad Wilk on drums, released a new studio album, 13. Under the production of Rick Rubin, the group returned to that raw and heavy sound of the 1970s. The album rose to #1 on the U.S. charts for the first time in the band's career. They won a Grammy Award for the song God Is Dead. This album was like a farewell kiss, showing that the legend was not dead, but on the contrary, stronger than ever. In 2016-2017, Black Sabbath said goodbye to their fans with a world tour titled The End. This 50-year saga ended with the last concert they gave in their home, Birmingham. Despite Tony Iommi's battle with lymphoma, his massive performance on stage was admirable. Sabbath stepped off the stage, but left behind an entire genre and millions of inspired musicians. They are both the alpha and the omega of heavy metal. Black Sabbath is more than just a group. It is a phenomenon. All kinds of heavy music we listen to today were built on their dark riffs. Over 70 million album sales, countless awards, and a philosophy that affected millions of lives. They came out of the poor neighborhoods of Birmingham and became the gods of music. The name Black Sabbath will continue to be the voice of darkness and power as long as the world turns. Hail to the masters of riffs!